It reads as this. My name is Amanda, and I was around 9 or 10 when I became afraid of something that shouldn't have mattered at all. It was just a doll. My mom kept it on a shelf in the hallway outside my bedroom. It was antique looking, cloth body, porcelain face, big bright blue eyes that never seemed to catch the light just right. It wore a blue-pink striped top and faded blue leggings, like something meant to look cheerful decades ago, but now it just felt kinda creepy. I couldn't explain it, and no one ever asked me to. I just knew I didn't like walking past it alone. At night, I'd hurry to my room and shut the door, convincing myself that I didn't look at it for too long. It couldn't do anything. That's how a child's mind works. You make rules to survive and work through the fear. Then, I started having these dreams. The first one, I couldn't move. I was laying in bed, staring at the ceiling, and I could feel something above me, like pressure in the air, kind of. It was heavy. When I forced my eyes to open, the doll, it was sitting there hovering above me, floating, close enough that I could see cracks in the porcelain face. And the blue eyes, they weren't moving or blinking. I woke up screaming. My parents rushed. They came to me as fast as they could, flipped the lights on, told me it was just a nightmare and it was okay. They always did, but the fear didn't leave with the lights. It stayed in my chest, tight, buzzing almost. The dreams came back once or twice a week. Always the same feeling, being watched, feeling trapped. Sometimes the doll stood at the foot of my bed, sometimes it sat at my desk, legs dangling and facing me. The worst part was that I would wake up already convinced it was real. One night after another nightmare, I opened my eyes and felt the familiar pressure again. I turned my head slowly towards my desk, and the doll was there, sitting upright, facing my bed. I remember freezing. I remember my heart beating so fast, it was loud enough to give me away. I knew absolutely that the doll had never been in my room before. I wouldn't have let anyone bring it in. I hated it so much. I screamed until my throat burned. My parents came running again. The lights came on. My dad checked the room. My mom hugged me. They told me I must have been dreaming again. I looked, and the doll, it wasn't there though. After that night, my fear wasn't just the doll anymore. It was of sleep itself. I fought going to bed. I slept with the lights on. I started waking up at the smallest sound, convinced something had moved. Eventually, my parents packed the doll away. I didn't see it again, and as I got older, the nightmares faded, like most childhood fears. It became something I didn't talk about, something embarrassing, really. Something I told myself that I'd exaggerated about. Years later, I found out the doll had belonged to my grandmother. She had bought it at a Goodwill years before I was born. There was no story attached to it, no history, just something she thought was pretty. My parents still have it. It's in a box in storage now. It's missing an arm now, and I don't remember how or when that happened. Nobody does. As an adult, I like to think I understand what happened. It was night terrors, an overactive imagination, a child projecting fear onto an object that felt uncanny. There are explanations that make sense if you say them out loud, but sometimes when I visit my parents' house, I'll wake up in the middle of the night with that same pressure in the air, that same feeling in my chest, that same unmistakable feeling of being watched. I don't dream about the doll anymore. I just lay there, staring into the dark, reminding myself that it's packed away, sealed in a box, missing an arm, and harmless. Still, I never asked to see it. Some things don't need to be brought back. And some fears, no matter how old you get, they never really leave the room or you. My name is Bill, and the first nightmare I ever remember wasn't about monsters. It was about my house. I was 8 when my parents bought it, an old 2-story place at the edge of town that had been sitting empty for years. It wasn't falling apart or anything, it just looked tired, with a sagging porch, thick layers of paint peeling off the siding, windows that reflected the sky a little too dark, like they weren't fully awake almost. My parents loved it immediately. They said it had character. They said it was solid. They said the renovations would make it feel brand new. I didn't argue. I was just a kid. Kids don't get a vote. During the day, the house felt fine. Dusty, loud with construction noises, always smelling like wood and paint. At night, though, it changed. The sounds were different, sharper, more deliberate. Every creak felt closer than it should have been. My bedroom was upstairs at the end of the narrow hallway. The ceiling sloped down slightly, making the room feel smaller than what it was. My bed sat against a far wall, and across from it was my closet, with no door. Just a dark opening with a rod and some shelves my dad had just finished. That's where the nightmares started. The first one came a week after we moved in. I dreamed I woke up in my bed, unable to move, staring straight at the closet. The house was silent. There's no wind outside, no creaking, just silence. So heavy it made my ears ring. And that's when I heard the footsteps. Slow, careful, like someone was trying not to be noticed. They came from downstairs. In the dream, I wanted to scream for my parents, but my mouth wouldn't open. The footsteps, they reached the bottom of the stairs, then they started climbing up them. Each step made the wood groan, and with every sound, the pressure in my chest grew worse. I knew it was fear. When the footsteps reached the top, that's where they stayed, right outside my door. I woke up screaming. My parents rushed in, flipped on the lights. They checked the hallways, the stairs, the front door. My dad, he kind of shrugged it off, told me it was an old house and they make noises. My mom rubbed my back until my breathing slowed and I was calmed down. I believed them, at least I wanted to. But the dream came back the next night, and the night after that. Sometimes the footsteps stopped at my door. Sometimes they continued down the hallway and stopped at the closet. I never saw anyone. I never needed to. The fear was always in the waiting. After a while, the dream started bleeding into my real life. I'd wake up in the middle of the night convinced I'd heard someone walking up the stairs, and I'd lay there, counting seconds between the creaks, trying to decide if they were random or patterned. Sometimes I'd get brave enough to sit up and look at the closet. It was always empty. One night during a thunderstorm, I woke up to the sound of movement in my room. No footsteps, it was something softer, like fabric brushing against the wood. I stared at the closet opening. In the dim flashing of the lightning, I thought I saw something shift inside. Not a shape, just darkness rearranging itself. I bolted out of bed and ran to my parents' room. I slept on their floor that night. Then the next, and then almost every night after that. The renovations, they dragged on for months. Walls came down, floors were replaced. My dad spent a lot of time in the basement, tearing out old shelving and hauling boxes up the stairs. He told me their previous owners had left a lot behind. I asked him what kind of stuff. Nothing important, he said. The nightmares stopped abruptly, though, when school started again. I started sleeping in my own bed, again. The house felt kind of quieter, lighter almost. Like whatever tension I'd felt before had settled into the walls almost. Years had passed. We lived there until I was 16. I stopped thinking about the nightmares completely until one night, during my senior year, my parents were out late and I fell asleep watching TV downstairs. I woke up to footsteps. Upstairs. They were slow and careful like. My heart, it just sunk. For a split second, I was 8 years old again, staring at a dark hallway waiting for something to reach the top of the stairs. I forced myself to check. The house was empty, doors were locked, nothing out of place. The next morning, I asked my dad casually if he remembered anything strange about the renovations. He hesitated longer than I expected. Then he told me something he'd never mentioned before. When they cleared out the basement, they'd found a small, finished room behind the false wall. No windows, no lights, just a mattress on the floor and deep grooves worn into the concrete, like something heavy had been dragged in and out repeatedly. The previous owners had never disclosed it either. My dad said they sealed it up immediately. I didn't ask anything else. Mom and Dad sold the house about a year later. I'm an adult now. I lived in plenty of old places since then. I don't have nightmares about footsteps or anything like that anymore, but every once in a while I'll wake up convinced I've heard someone moving throughout my home. I was 10 years old the summer that my nightmares started. My parents called it our lake house, but it never felt like it belonged to us. It sat on a narrow stretch of land where the trees thinned out and the water came right up to the deck. The house was old, older than most of the cabins nearby, and built before anyone cared about things like lighting or open layouts. From my bedroom window, I could see the lake. During the day, it was all calm. Gray blue water, slow ripples, the kind of view adults stare at and say makes them feel peaceful. At night, it seemed to always turn into a flat black surface that reflected nothing. No moon, no stars, just emptiness that felt closer than it should have been. My room was at the end of the hall, facing the water. The door didn't latch properly, so it stayed cracked open unless I wedged a chair under the handle. My parents said it was fine, it's just an old house. Yes, they said, it settles, it creaks and moans. The first nightmare came the second night that we were there. I dreamed I was laying in bed awake, staring out the window. The lake was perfectly still. There's no insects, no wind. But then slowly, something disturbed the water. Not a splash, just a winding ripple, like something had stepped into the water without breaking the surface. In the dream, I knew I wasn't supposed to look away. The ripples moved closer to shore. When they reached the edge of the dock, I woke up. I was soaked in sweat, my heart was racing, my room was dark. The lake outside my window looked exactly the same as it had in the dream, flat and black and motionless. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. I remember having the same dreams every night after that. Always something moving beneath the surface of the water without ever fully appearing. Sometimes I'd hear footsteps on the dock. Other times I'd hear breathing, slow and uneven, coming from outside my window. I started keeping count of the boards on the deck during the day, just to prove to myself it was solid. Just wood, just some water. But at night, I'd wake up convinced someone was standing at the end of it, staring at the house. One night, after a particularly bad dream, I opened my eyes and saw movement beyond the glass. Not on the water or the shore, but a shape passed between the trees, slow and deliberate, like someone walking without trying to be quiet. I pulled the blanket over my head and stayed that way until the morning. When I told my parents, they blamed it on being away from home. Too much swimming, too much sun, being up too late. My dad laughed and said I'd been watching too many scary movies. That afternoon, I found something strange near the water line. It was a shoe. Old, waterlogged, half buried in the sand like it had been there for years. I brought it up to my mom. and her face changed in a way I hadn't seen before. Not fear, but recognition. She told me to drop it back where I found it. That night, the nightmare was different. In it, I was standing on the dock. The lake was calm, but I could feel movement beneath my feet. Something pressed upward from below, bowing the planks on the dock slightly. I looked down and saw handprints forming under the water, sliding along the underside of the dock, as if searching for a way up. I woke up screaming. The next morning, my parents argued in the kitchen, quietly, but not quietly enough. I caught words like accident and years ago, and they never found him. That day, my dad blocked off the dock, said it wasn't safe anymore, said the boards were rotten. The nightmare seemed to stop after that. We left early that summer. Years later, I asked my mom about the shoe. She didn't want to talk about it, but eventually she did. When they'd bought the place, the realtor had mentioned offhand that a teenager had gone missing in the lake decades earlier. Nobody, no closure, just rumors about night swimming and a strong undercurrent near the dock. They never told me because they didn't want to scare me. But something about that place did anyway. I've been back to plenty of lakes since then. I swim, boat, I stand on docks without thinking twice. But I never sleep in the rooms that face the water. And I never stay somewhere that goes completely quiet at night either. Because I still remember how that lake didn't feel empty. And it felt impatient. If any of these stories felt familiar, you're not alone. Let me know in the comments which one you could relate to. And if you want more true horror stories like this, or encounters, subscribe, turn on your notifications, and I'll see you in the next one.